All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Simon. I'm here with the Ashoka team, and I'm welcoming you to Welcome Change. This is Ashoka's weekly series where we are joined by leading social entrepreneurs and their teams from all over the world. And today we are delighted to also be joining with all of you, parents, grandparents, teachers, social entrepreneurs, friends, and philanthropists who are joining to listen to our guests and our speakers today. I suspect some of you are joining because you already know our guests and our speakers, Dr. William Jackson and the Village of Wisdom team. Others, I suspect, are joining because they know and they follow Ashoka and this Welcome Change series. And so as we're just getting to know each other and settling in, I thought I would just say a quick line about each of those, Village of Wisdom and Ashoka. So Ashoka is a global association of social entrepreneurs, Ashoka Fellows like Will or Dr. Jackson, and Village of Wisdom is the organization that he and his colleagues here and others launched to lead a nationwide movement to protect Black genius. And today we have 30 minutes to get to know what they're up to. We've already, as Ashoka, had the chance to get to know Will and share his story. And oftentimes we do this. We have conversations with the founders of these really, beautiful and stunning social innovations. Sometimes we don't tell the full story, or that doesn't allow us to tell the full story of the teams and the other things that are happening. So we are going to turn the mic over to Will to bring in the other voices and other members of his team who make this stunning work possible. So that's a key point about the format today. Will be our moderator, and we'll be getting to know Amber and Taylor and their work. A couple quick last points about format before I scoot. One is that you should use the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen to put questions or things that are on your mind to the panelists or to Will, who will bring those into the conversation. So feel free to bring your own questions. And also, if you'd rather read or if you're having troubles hearing, you can use the closed caption feature, which is also available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. 3 little dots, click on them, choose the show captions. I think that's as much housekeeping and admin as I needed to do. So my work here is done. It is really an honor to pass it over to you, Will. I'm gonna turn off camera. I'll pop back in 3 minutes to make sure we're all good. And I'm really excited for this conversation. Take it away.
Thanks, Simon. I appreciate it. I appreciate Ashoka for setting us up and giving us this time today. I'm super excited to talk to y'all, and I'm more excited to be here talking with my co-workers and I think friends and family. I'm gonna call them Amber Majors and TaylorWebber-Fields. What's up, Amber, Taylor? How y'all feeling today?
Doing pretty good.
Good. Cool. So we're gonna jump in. I'm gonna just tell y'all real quick what Amber and Taylor does, and then we're gonna get into this conversation and see where it takes us. So Amber from our team leads our research work. She is also the brainchild behind this amazing clearinghouse idea that we have, and we're pursuing to create a clearinghouse for culturally affirming learning strategies from Black parents or that are validated by Black parents. And Taylor is the leader of our amazing parent work. So she is the reason why we get a lot of parents into the organization. She's the one who protects our parents while they're with our organization, and she's always centering a parent voice in her work. So that's the real kind of quick rundown, and I'm gonna jump into it. So for those of y'all who might not be familiar with Village of Wisdom, we like to kind of start off all of our conversations with a check-in, and we try to keep our check-ins Black. So Amber and Taylor told me that they didn't want to know what the check-in was. They wanted it to be a surprise, so I'm about to surprise them with this check-in. We're gonna see how this goes down and whether they think that's a good idea afterwards. So. So the check-in today is, I want you to pick any Black genius, those who have transitioned are with us today. And in particular, I want the Black genius, the spirit that you would want to bring to this conversation today. Like, so when you think about like the energy you were about to bring to this conversation today, what Black genius comes to mind? Those who have transitioned or those who are still with us?
I said an easy one, Will. Something I ain't have to think about.
What? This was easy. You already know what energy you bringing, so you got.
That's true. That's true. Looks like Amber's ready.
Yeah, I got mine. So my Black genius is gonna be my late grandmother, Eula Marie Pettiford. and yeah, just thinking about the energy that she passed on to me is just like, speaking her mind, speaking up for other people. Yeah, and just having that energy where she's confident about what she's saying. Where she's from, she was like the first woman to drive taxis, and she advocated for herself in that way. So that's the kind of energy I'm coming with. Yeah.
Oh, y'all getting new gems on the Zoom chat today. I ain't even heard about that. I heard about grandma, but I didn't know she was the first taxi driver. All right, come on, Taylor, what you got?
Ashe. I mean, this is my go-to ancestor, my grandmother, my late grandmother, Ellie Williams Weber. She was a confident speaker in her community. She was definitely someone that people looked to and sought wisdom from. And so she's somebody that I still seek counsel with on a regular basis. I couldn't find her ring today. I usually wear her ring when I have speaking engagements because she just had this ring. I feel like it still has her energy. So I am bringing Ellie Williams Weber with me to this conversation. So thank you for asking, Will. Who you bringing?
Yeah.
Who you bringing?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Y'all know I do a lot of talking most of the time, right? And so today I'm thinking about the person in my life who always got 1,000 questions for me, and the person who I think inspired me to ask good questions, and that's my mom, right? So shout out to Dr. Lillian Jackson, a Spelman alum, an amazing educator for more than 30 years. So shout out to my mom and the way she be asking me all the questions in the world. So I'm gonna try to bring my best Lillian spirit today into this conversation. So jumping off with my best Lillian vibes, I want to know why Black Genius is so important to y'all. Like, what about it makes you feel good? What about it, like, why is this a thing? Why is it important?
Yeah. Well, first, I kind of want to start off by saying like what Black Genius is and like what it means to me. And so I think the thing about Black Genius that's really interesting is that it's both a noun and a verb and an adjective. And it's very all encompassing. And so, I mean, for me personally, Black Genius, I kind of think about the creation story and how the very planet that we stand on was birthed from darkness or blackness, as some people would describe it. And so when I think about Black Genius, I just think about the eternal and ever-present creative genius of Black learners. And what does it look like to tap into that creative potential? What does it look like to bring that out, to breathe life into it, to protect it, and see the other worlds that it can create, right? So a whole planet was created from Blackness. What can our Black learners put into the world? And so within Village of Wisdom, I found a home to not only express and share my own Black genius, but to also be in continual pursuit and interrogation of what Black genius means. So I know what it means to me, but I learn something new about it every day from my peers, from the work, from our parents. And so it's just, Black genius is a journey. It really is. It's a journey. And then within our community, Black Genius has absolutely become an affirmation. It's also a call into the future that we want to see. We call it, our Afro future. We just, closed out Afro Futures Month, formerly known as Black History Month. And so that's what Black Genius means to me.
Yeah. Okay. She didn't try to lead none for you, Amber. What you got? What you got?
I really appreciated when Taylor said, breathing life into Black learners, because something I think about in addition to what Taylor said is how this is also a framework for where we think about what supports the positive and healthy development of Black learners and Black children. And, I think about a lot how Jean Piaget, who developed a framework for how kids develop, he studied his children. So, I think about why not get that same wisdom from Black parents? That's how he developed his theory. So, if we can allow him to have a theory where he studied his kids, why not tap into Black parents' wisdom? So, that's something I love about Black Genius too. Like Taylor said, we're always learning from parents. And I think that's what makes it really strong. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel that, Amber. I see you trying to get ahead of me talking about the researchers and who gets to participate in these conversations and get to define what Black Genius is. And I'll just say that that is a big part of like when we talk about Black genius, we talk about creating new systems of equity and justice. Like that's the thing I repeat over and over again. And both Amber and Taylor just kind of exemplified that for y'all a little bit. Like who has access to thought, right? Like who gets to create knowledge, right? And I think we got to ask ourselves that question, like who are the knowledge creators in our society and what ramifications does that have for people who have to learn inside of schools and who they learn from and who they want to become and what kind of knowledge they want to create. But again, I'm channeling my Lillian. So the journey of Black parents, right? The journey of Val parents. Tell me about what are they dreaming, y'all? Like when you talk to Black parents, what do they say they want for their kids? What do they say they want for themselves? And most importantly, the thing, and this is a little bit of a surprise question, but I was thinking about it. A lot of times we talk about why organizations are so important to the people that we serve. But what I want to think about, right, and I want to push y'all to talk about is why are Black parents so important to us, right? Like why are Black parents so important to Village of Wisdom?
Yeah. I appreciate that that little caveat, that last question, the surprise question. Black parents are so important to Val. I think the first thing that came to mind was like we were all birthed from Black parents. We have experience with Black parents. I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, we're here, we're doing dope and amazing things. And I think that leads us to believe that this potential exists in everybody, right? In all Black learners. And so our parents were our first teachers. So we know the value of Black learners, right? And so when we look at these systems, the gross oversight is not taking in the wisdom of Black parents, right? So when we're talking about this, the achievement gap, right? It's really an undereducation of Black students. And a lot of times the reason that's happening is because Black parents are being left out, right? And so oftentimes the journey, I had to sit and think about like, what is the journey of parents when they come into Val's care? Or what is the journey of Black parents, period? And so when I was reflecting on this, oftentimes folks come to our work or come to our care from a place of disappointment, right? It's a place of disappointment and straight up anger, right? Because it's like we're walking around with this sense of knowing that our learners are not getting the proper enrichment. They're not getting nourished in the ways that they deserve to be. And so Black parents often come to us frustrated. Not only have they been disappointed, but they've been isolated. Because when they start to name that there's an issue, they're often iced out of their own communities, right? Their own school communities. And so we see this phenomenon where Black parents are seeking affirmation first. Like, I know something's up, but ain't nobody really trying to mess with me on this. So help me, right? Like, I know something's going on. So then they, oftentimes parents come to us usually through like word of mouth, like, yo, check out Village of Wisdom. Like you own it. You know what's going on, right? And so we get to, be in this learning space with parents to hear about their disappointments, to hear about what they've been experiencing. And oftentimes what comes up is parents' own learning journeys, right? So they're recognizing what's happening with their students from a place of their own experience. So what happens is we have parents, and there's some unpacking, there's some undoing that we have to do with our parents. And so that kind of starts with just creating this space. We actually try to create or curate the culturally relevant experience that our parents often didn't get before. And so by then having that experience, it creates that environment to be affirmed. It creates that sense of community that no, you're not alone on this journey. There are other Black parents who are also feeling this pain or feeling these disappointments. And so what happens is, within that experience, parents get to leave with, the affirmation, right, that they were seeking. And I think what's also like really, really important is, like I stated, like it's like this walking around with this knowing that something's not right, but you don't really know how to articulate that thing, right? We have the benefit of going through like equity trainings or going through, different courses and things to help us understand it. But when parents come with us, we offer them back Black genius. It's something that's already theirs, but it's a framework to kind of analyze what is this mess I'm sitting in. And so parents get to walk away with, we feel like they get to walk away with the community, because once you get down with that, we don't tend to let you go. So that's one piece of it. They leave with the affirmation and they leave with the framework and the support. And so, yeah, I would say that's in a nutshell. There's so many layers, but in a nutshell, that's more or less the journey of Black parents with Val.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's 6 years of work, and Taylor's been journeying a long time with parents. So she tried to give y'all a snippet. And I think, you know, Amber, maybe you could speak a little bit to like that idea of this conversation of the Black genius, right? Like the framework, because you were huge in kind of bringing the framework to life and having conversations with parents about basically what Taylor said, like, what did they want, right? What did you find out about what they wanted, and what did it mean to kind of begin to have those conversations in this like more researchy but structured way, I guess I'll say.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. You know, when I think about like what Black parents were saying they wanted, I know I started off doing like a couple of sessions about like, you know, what is these different elements of the Black genius framework, you know, what do they mean to you? What are they teaching you about your children? And although these frameworks were teaching them about their children, what really became apparent to me is that Black parents also want to see change in their children's classrooms. Like, you know, they might not necessarily have a background in teaching, but as Taylor said, they are their children's first teachers. They watch their children, you know, develop from the stage where they were like playing, and, you know, play is a form of learning, to now as they're matriculating through school. And so I think they just have a lot of wisdom to offer in terms of thinking about, okay, well, what does it look like to engage and teach their children in the classroom? So yeah, and you know, we might get more into that when we talk about the clearinghouse, but you know, that's what I get really amped up about, is like, Black parents have a lot of wisdom to offer there. So why don't we lead into it? Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead and go there, Amber. Like, tell us about like this clearinghouse idea. And I think in particular, like, what's the issue there, right? Like, if we look at a clearinghouse right now, who could we expect to see in terms of the people who created the clearinghouse? And what's the gap between that person and what you might hear a Black person and a Black parent say?
Yeah. So when we think about clearinghouses, specifically in the education space, what they've been for is for researchers who are mostly at universities, right, to connect to like school systems and schools to say, here are some evidence-based practices that you can use in your classroom. You can train your staff to use these. And, you know, historically, those evidence-based practices have come from white scientists, and probably mostly white male scientists. And so, you know, when we think about that, like what's existing out there and most of the practices that are shared, if they're coming from these white male scientists, then that means the ideas that we could even fathom of, you know, what would we even test as an evidence-based practice? You know, those might mostly come from their experiences and their lens. So, you know, when we think about like the opportunities to like summon Black parents to really have voice in, okay, well, not only do we want to validate these existing practices, we also want to think about, you know, how can we collaborate with like Black researchers or get ideas to Black researchers, and in turn, get those Black researchers' ideas out there? Because, you know, there are a lot of connection points there. And I'll just say another gap I was seeing is that sometimes it was assumed that like, oh, well, if we just do this practice on positive behavioral and intervention supports, you know, the culture piece would just fall in there. We just assumed that the practitioner would know how to use it. So, you know, that's like a big assumption to make. And so I know when I was doing some of that early research work, looking at clearinghouses, I asked my supervisors I was working with at the time a lot of questions like, these are interesting practices, but where do we bring in, you know, like culture, and where do we really speak to like what people from diverse backgrounds need? And, you know, in particular, I was thinking Black students. So that's what really kind of birthed the clearinghouse idea. I know the time when the light bulb came on, we were actually talking to some of our partners, and they were saying it would be really cool if we like had recommendations for people who would use our work. And then, you know, just this idea of there just being a specific set of recommendations, you know, I was thinking there's a lot out there that can be used. So then that's when it was like, oh, why don't we have a database of practices? So yeah, that's kind of how it was dreamed up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, thank you for taking that journey with us, Amber. I mean, and one thing, I'm gonna just jump in real quick, you know, and I know I'm supposed to be asking questions, but like, I just want to point out one of the things that Amber said and underscore it, and this is something that Taylor also brought up too, right? Is that Black parents had a sense of what was missing, right? And a big part of what was missing is culture. And a lot of times I think when people hear that, they miss the importance of culture to the cognitive processes that are important to learning. And so just as a quick breakdown, learning is the ability or the action of connecting prior knowledge to new information. And so what I want you to ask yourself right now is, where does prior knowledge come from? Vygotsky, a white Russian researcher, tells us that prior knowledge comes from culture. Our culture helps us learn how to count. It helps us learn how to talk to people. It helps us learn how we connect and make new ideas, right? All of that is basically the software of your brain. And so when we force Black children and Black parents and everybody else into these education systems where their culture is not just ignored, but a lot of times vilified, it makes it impossible for them to connect prior knowledge to new information, because we basically tell them that their prior knowledge is unvaluable. When you tell somebody that their prior knowledge is unvaluable, you cannot sit up there and expect them to be able to learn in that environment. And so that's why it is so key when Amber talks about creating these strategies, because we need strategies that are going to make intentional connections to culture inside of that pedagogical strategy. Because if it does not make that connection, then that particular pedagogical strategy is just useless in our environments, right? So I think, Taylor, I don't know if you want to jump in right here, but, what I'm thinking about is like what you said earlier about like what parents are looking for, right? Like what parents kind of support they need, and why a clearinghouse might be so valuable when we start talking about advocacy conversations and some of these other pieces.
Yeah, thank you, good Reverend Doctor. Will get me worked up over here. So yeah, I mean, thank you for that, Will. That just got me animated. I felt the juice. It just came into my spirit. And so, I mean, I think some of what Will is speaking to, right? So this culture, the environment, and the same things that Amber's, all of this stuff is like, it's sitting on a system of the foundation of those systems, the foundations of those practices are largely white and male, right? And so when we think about other or center white males, right? And so when we think about Black students, they're just not a part of that equation. And so there's so many systems, not even just the curriculum, but the whole school environment itself. And so the number one thing that parents want is safety. I mean, that's the number one thing that any parent wants for their child, is to know that they are safe, right? And so safety, we're not just talking about their physical safety. Yeah, COVID is a reality, but so is like their emotional safety, their social safety, their just everything. And so when we think about like the importance of culture and the importance of racial affirmation, when you look at a society that largely undervalues Black people and Black culture, it's really, really important that Black learners are in an environment that's safe, encompassing all the levels of safety. And then the other thing that parents are really wanting for their students is, it's tough. It's hard to say this, but we recently wrapped up a research project, and one of the overwhelming or the resounding kind of like feedback around what is wanted for children is just the ability to dream, just like the safety, just the well-being of our children, like to be able to do all the things and to reach their full potential. And again, these are very, very basic wants for children. It's crazy that we have to create like very specific environments for Black parents to actualize these things, right? And then the last thing that I feel that parents are really asking for is something like a clearinghouse, right? Like the direction, the strategies, and then the support and investment. The investment is a huge part. So when we're going into these school systems, who gonna pay for this clearinghouse that Amber's putting together, right? Put it, you know what I'm saying? Put the investment in those kinds of tools that are gonna support the instruction of Black learners. And when it's not there, parents feel it, students feel it. When the underinvestment of these schools, when you look around our neighborhoods and our communities, it's so evident. And this is actually, this is churning out the future that we're wanting, right? So we have to be very critical. We have to be very intentional about bringing in Black parent voice and valuing it, honoring it. So not just having a seat at the table to have a seat, but bringing them into decision, into power positions and decision-making processes. And that's what parents deserve rest. They deserve respect. They deserve interrogation and affirmation. I mean, they deserve the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amber, so I appreciate you bringing up the rights of parents, right? Like we talk about so much about like what parents deserve, Taylor, like that, you know, I appreciate you kind of laying that out for folks, because I think a lot of times folks don't recognize that we have like certain inalienable rights, right? Like folks have the right to be able to have this type of experience. And Amber, I think, you know, Taylor kind of touched on this real quick, but I'm just wondering if like you could quickly like just walk us through like, how does this project we just recently did, right, to try to get to a validated Black parent practice, right? Because I think some people are like wondering, well, like, what do they mean? Like the parent isn't a researcher, right? And then like, how does that tie to the dream of this, right? Like, how does this, because I think part of the dream is the outcome, which I think Taylor just kind of talked about, but also part of the dream is the process, right? Like, I don't think we have enough conversation about the process to get to these things, because the process a lot of times evolves into, or it determines what we get on that other side.
Yeah. Yeah. So a big part of that process is really, you know, equipping them with, when I say tools, it might not just be like a tangible tool, right? But it might also be like equipping them with not just the existing language that's out there in the research field, right? But giving them sort of, I would say, a basis where they can be confident saying, well, you know, I'm going to get a little tap into what it means for a practice to be evidence-based. You can give me a little bit of background, and then I'm gonna just take the reins from here. So I'm really thinking about, you know, through that process, they're beginning to build some authority and feeling confident about that authority and saying, well, you know, I've gone through this process. You know, I know what a practice should look like if the outcome is to be that, you know, my child feels affirmed in the classroom. My child is excited about going to learn in the classroom. My child is excited about doing insert X subject here. So, you know, that's what I really think about, is equipping parents with the tools that they need to really feel confident in that process. And so, yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the other end, right? Because I think even through the process, that's how they're able to come out on the other end and say, well, you know, I know what my child needs, or I know what Black children in general need, and them feeling really confident about going through that validation process, and being able to communicate, whether it's through like the clearinghouse or through, you know, like their own interactions with folks who teach their children, about what would be evidence-based practices for Black, you know, Black learners, cultural affirmation. So yeah. That's a good
and so we got a couple of questions in the chat, and I know we running a little long. I mean, if y'all ever been to a Black service or church or whatever, you know, we like to extend timeline. So we probably gonna run to 140. Ashoka gave us the thumbs up on that. So what I'm gonna do is, like, there's a couple questions in the chat, and I'm gonna try to respond and kind of move us along so that we can get to them. If other folks want to send questions to chat, this is a good time. So one of our Black parents from Durham has done showed up in the chat asking questions. Tamara Beneath. So what's up, Tamara? Appreciate you, you know, kind of joining us. And basically the question is around like any ideas on how to cultivate Black genius in teachers, as they tend to want to focus on behavior and quickly change even Black educators as parents from that perspective. If you try to talk more from a positive perspective to address your child's behavior issues, they feel like we don't understand and don't believe they're acting up in class. So just kind of like restating that real quick, I think a lot of times what you see is that students aren't always challenged in the classroom, right? Like this is the classic thing I think we hear from Black parents, right? My child isn't necessarily feeling challenged. And when the child doesn't feel challenged and they don't feel connected to the particular classroom environment, unsurprisingly, a lot of times those kids are disinterested and may even act up, right? Quote unquote. But what does it mean, right, to cultivate this idea of Black genius in the minds of teachers, and also to be able to have a concrete conversation, right? So like, I'm gonna just jump in real quick and just be really tangible about like the Black genius profile. So a couple of things that, you know, we had in conversations, or we found from conversations around Black parents, is that they would say a few things, and I'm not gonna go through the whole Black genius framework because that's too long, but like I'll point out three that I think are always critical. One, my kid isn't interested in what's going on here. And we know that this is important because like there's this theory in self-determination research that talks about like intrinsic motivation, the motivation that comes from the inside is the most important motivation to kind of power learning, right? So like when you introduce ideas that kids have no interest in, then it's going to be really difficult to motivate that learning. And we tend to cater to that for white kids, right? But when a Black kid brings it up or a Black parent says it, then for whatever reason, through our racist minds, like we hear that as unvaluable, right? And so that's where kind of the implicit bias is important. And so part of like trying to get teachers to adopt that is to really try to make sure that they see Black children as human, right? A lot of folks talk about dehumanization and all this other stuff. And through that dehumanization, sometimes I think our words maybe it kind of hits people wrong, but really that's what's going on. When you don't value somebody else's interest as much as another kid's interest, you're dehumanizing one of those people. You're saying that it's not as valuable. The other thing we talk a lot about is racial affirmation. So like you got to show the intellectual contributions of Black people in order for Black kids to want to see themselves in that environment and to feel like they belong, right? So Amber talked earlier about her grandmama being like one of the first taxi cab drivers. That was a Black woman. Like that's probably like laid, and that's why we pay so much attention to that stuff. Like that's why Jackie Robinson is such a big deal. That's why George Washington Carver is such a big deal. That's why so many of these people. That's why Kamala Harris is like a big deal, right? Because now I can see myself in that spot. And then the last thing we talk a lot about is trust. And I always bring up trust because Taylor talked about this a lot earlier. When you can't trust an environment, that is an environment, according to Brene Brown, which a lot of white folks like, and I think she's smart and all this genius and stuff, but she says that you can't love and create in those environments. And I just want you to just sit there and let that sink in, right? Like when you go talk to these teachers and you're telling that teacher that your Black child can't learn because they can't trust that teacher, I want you to say to them, my child can't love in this environment and they can't create in this environment. And if they can't love and they can't create in this environment, then what kind of learning is happening there? Mm-hmm. What I will definitively tell you is that child can't tap into their Black genius, as we've talked about it, because in order to be Black genius, that means you got to be able to create new systems of equity and justice. And the first word in there was create. So if you got an environment where kids can't love and they can't create, then to me, that learning environment is worthless. That's just William Jackson's opinion. But I bring up all that to say, like, does that bring up any advice for y'all, for parents or teachers in terms of like trying to have this conversation about Black genius and getting people to buy into this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, you brought up the Black genius profile. And I think the one thing I try to offer to is especially non-Black educators that are, asking these questions, what undergirds that profile is a sense of curiosity, right? And so there's so many assumptions about Black learners that teachers or educators oftentimes don't take that extra step to build that rapport or to really lean into that curiosity about the individual student. Now, there are lots of layers and reasons why that happens, right? We can also talk about how teachers are underpaid. We can talk about that too, but there's so many different layers. But what I would like to offer is like a key piece of really this whole racism issue is curiosity. Just be curious about people, be curious about individuals, and take that and run with it and embed that back into your practices. Don't let the Black part intimidate you to the point where you can't just see a human standing, a student learner in front of you. And so, yeah, that's what I most wanted to offer. Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that, Taylor. What you thinking, Amber?
Yeah, like related to what Taylor said about being curious, like I think it's really a call in to say, have this dialogue with like parents and students. Like it's inviting them to say, like, you don't have to know, people talk about the difference between like cultural competence versus like, I'm gonna use cultural curiosity because Taylor put it out there.
I like that.
Assuming you have to hit the ground knowing everything about, Black culture or Black families, like part of it is that learning, like being open to learning, like, what works for the Black learners in my classroom. And that, sometimes that's learning from organizations like Val when we talk, but a lot of times that's like talking to your Black families and the Black students and just learning about like what's working for these Black families, what makes them feel affirmed. But yeah.
Yeah, and so we got a couple people in the chat or in the questions asking kind of where we can get this information from, right? So, we're not everywhere right now. Like, that's why people are trying to get us on conversations like Ashoka. So hopefully, folks can invest and we can try to do our best to share this good gospel all over the place. But what you can do is if you go to villageofwisdom.com or villageofwisdom.org, my bad, .com will take you there too, but .org, you'll see a pop-up, right? And it'll say basically pledge to protect Black genius. And when you take that pledge to protect Black genius, one, that puts us on our mailing list, right? And so when the clearinghouse or the beta version of the clearinghouse comes out later this year, you'll get that first the first 2 offerings of that. And then when it actually launches, you'll get that information as well. So go to the website, wait for the pop-up to click up, and then it'll, you can put your information in there. And then what it'll also do is it'll take you to our resources. So there's a resource page on our website, and you can try to navigate to it through Village of Wisdom. And on that resource page, it has like our Black Genius profile process. It has the Black Genius kind of like parent conversation workbook that Taylor came up with. There's a Black Genius video. There's a lot of good resources on there. So like if you're trying to get into that conversation, then you can get into that conversation in the beginnings of kind of like the clearinghouse on that resource page. The other thing, I just want to build on the cultural curiosity thing, and then I'm gonna ask y'all kind of like to end up with your to just tell me like what y'all's visions, kind of like what's your dream, what's the thing you want to leave people with, so y'all know that question is coming. So this cultural curiosity thing, I really appreciate y'all raising that. And that's a big part of like what Amber kind of built into the Black Genius profile when she was designing it, was to ask questions of Black children, to ask what they're interested in. Like, because you can't teach to their interests if you don't know what their interests are, right? Like it's not, I know sometimes it seems difficult, y'all, but like you gotta just ask the questions, right? And I think, and part of the issue, right, that some folks are running into is not about the curiosity thing, right? There's 2 things. One is that a lot of times we haven't done our own personal work to get by our biases, right? We have to kind of basically give it up that if we grew up in America and pretty much any other place on the globe, we learned a lot of racism, we learned a lot of white supremacy, we learned a lot of sexism, we learned a lot of patriarchy. And so if we haven't started to come to grips with and probably had some emotional reactions to the cognitive dissonance of like our mental minds kind of mindset shifting, then that's gonna block us from that curiosity. And so sometimes you're dealing with the fact that somebody hasn't necessarily started that journey. The other side of it is that society also kind of tells us that this stuff is unimportant, or it makes us like see barriers where they don't exist. Because I remember talking to one teacher and she was like, well, I can't do a Black Genius profile on all my kids. And so, what am I going to do? Just focus on one child. And I was like, well, who are you teaching to now? Right. And so that's a big question, because if you're not teaching to anybody, or if you're teaching to the general public, we know what that means in America. That means you are teaching to a white male child, right? Like that is the underlying kind of resource, or that's the underlying kind of system that we're taught to teach to. So if you aren't asking those questions of kids, of the Black kids in your classroom, or the brown kids of the classroom, or whoever else that isn't white, then most likely you're teaching to that white male in that classroom. And that's not doing that white male any good. And it's definitely not doing the Black kids any good, right? So like what we got to really think about is like, now that we ask those questions about how kids are trusting each other, what they want to learn about Blackness, who they love, like what are they interested in, then that gives us the entry point to connect our education and our learning experience to what that child believes and what that child wants to become. So, I told y'all I was going to ask y'all this question. So we about to get up out of here. Like, what is it? Like, tell me your biggest, like, Black genius dream that y'all want to leave with people before we check out.
Yeah. I'll just go real quick and say, when I dream of walking into like an education space, whatever that is. It might not be school as we know it. And, seeing Black kids really excited about creating and excited about learning. And then I also imagine, like even things that we think are like taboo right now, or that kids shouldn't do, like stop beating on the lunch table, like them being able to freely, live into their Black selves. So that's what I imagine and hope for. But yeah.
I love it.
I love it too. I love it. I don't know why when you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was Hogwarts. So I don't know if we have any Harry Potter fans. I know, stay with me, y'all, stay with me.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Go
Stay
ahead.
with me now. I mean, I just think about like the breadth of imagination and exposure and just, I mean, those books, I was just so fully engrossed in those books as a child, right? And I remember my disappointment at the one Black character throughout the series. It's 8 of them daggone books, and it was only one Black character, right? And so I just imagine that, right? I mean, who can even fathom of a Hogwarts until J.K. Rowling brought it to us, right? I just imagine, I don't know, not even necessarily the school itself, but just that imagination space, right? What is a school? What does the school that produces the student that produces Hogwarts look like? You know what I mean? And not that that's the bar, but I'm just saying, I just think of that. I just think about the magic and creativity of Black. I see this all the time. I'm just astounded. And I pray for, and I hope for, I work for that environment for our Black babies to thrive and shine the way that they deserve to. So
yeah. And I mean, I'll just add, you know what I mean? Well, first of all, yeah, so I'll just add, like, for me, my vision, my dream, right, is that like kids are asked that question daily, right? What is the world that you dream of? What should that world look like? What would a fair and just world look like, right? And that they are consistently pouring their interest, whether that's in math, science, culture, art, whatever, into the dream of creating a system and a society for us that we haven't even imagined yet, right? Where everybody has equitable access to resources, and we don't live in a world that is so hell-bent on exploiting folks, so hell-bent on sending people back out into virus-ridden streets, so hell-bent in saying that we gotta work, you know, for us to even exist, like so hell-bent on so many of these things that exploit us, right? But a system that really allows us to flourish and grow. And so, you know, I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, say thank you publicly to Amber and Taylor for so much of their investment, how much they've kind of like banged with me through thick and thin, like for the work of Village of Wisdom, how much y'all have poured into this organization, how much you have lent your Black genius to us, and to this vision, into our society, and to this culture and this movement that we're doing. So I just want to say publicly, thank y'all so much to y'all. Thank you for joining me today, and answering these crazy questions. And shout out to Ashoka for giving us this platform.
For sure.
Folks, I'm going to pop back in here. I heard the word Ashoka. I mean, thank you all for showing up. And as a team that, like, I think we all want to be a part of, you know, that's what the Q&A is all about. People are saying, how can we do this? And we started with the question of like, why aren't Black parents tapped first at all, right? And so it's just such a beautiful thing to be a part of. Thank you for showing up as granddaughters, as a son. And also, I would say as systems changing, maybe not social entrepreneurs if you don't love that title, but disruptive innovators. And that's really what this platform, this every other Wednesday Welcome Change is about. It's a space for folks who are trying to get to the root cause and disrupt and change systems. When you all say that part of the dream is the process, like you out yourselves as systems changers. And I think this is just such a beautiful spot for you all to have shared your story. So thank you for doing that. For folks who've registered, you'll get a link to today's conversation and invites to other conversations. We're talking with folks who are disrupting, rethinking the Indigenous food systems in our country, mental health in teens, tapping into deaf culture. These are subsequent conversations that are coming up. I don't know that they're going to top this one, but we'll try. And thank you all really for sharing your time and talent and your dreams and visions with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Will, Amber, Taylor, good work. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Peace out.
You all.